Cleanups and retouches are our bread and butter as compositing artists. In my personal experience, one of the biggest hurdles for a convincing retouch is almost always perspective. It's just really hard to paint something seamlessly if it is at an odd angle. So, in today's video, we'll take a look at the 3D scene node and the Unproject Reproject workflow inside of the Silhouette plugin, and how that in turn can really streamline your work inside of your host application. I'm Christoph Zapletal for Boris Effects. Let's take a look. I've worked on a lot of commercials over the years, and trust me, one thing all those had in common were the little, invisible cleanups that the clients asked for each and every time. Of course, the same thing is true for my feature or episodic work. There's just this one tiny little detail drawing away the viewer's attention or interrupting the image composition. So, as usual, it falls to people like us to get rid of those. Let's take a look at this shot, where a car is driving through a snowy industrial area. Looks nice enough, but our client wants this cleaner, much more stylized. The little snow tracks here, as well as the manhole there, definitely need to be gone. And if we are honest, both the graffiti and the blocked windows don't look too nice either. For this example, we are running Silhouette as an OFX plugin inside of Flame, and trust me, this is a very typical task for a Flame artist. One issue we'll be running into with this kind of retouch is of course the perspective. Let me quickly pull up a paint node to show you the problem. If I try to clone in some of these red bricks, I'll naturally have a size difference between the bricks here and the area here with the graffiti. I might find an area like this one to clone something in, but this is really putting a big limit on what I can use for retouching. So what would be a good solution? Can we somehow remove perspective from the equation? Yeah, we can. To do that, we will do an Unproject Reproject workflow. That means we will track the camera and then put a plane into the area we want to retouch. Now comes the Unproject bit. We will take that plane and the pixels in that part of the image and just pull the four corners out to our entire canvas. I think you can see where I'm getting with this. Now we've got a stabilized version of that part of our image, and also the perspective is removed. So we've got a lot more freedom from where to clone stuff. Once we are done, we can reproject the entire painted version back into our image. Now Flame, like a lot of other compositing tools, is perfectly able to cater for this workflow, no doubt about it. But it often involves a lot of setup to just get to the point where I can finally start retouching. And I would say that Silhouette offers a much more streamlined approach to exactly that workflow, which will just cut down the numbers of nodes and clicks you'll need. So let's take a look. To get into Silhouette inside of Flame, I'll just pull up an OFX node and select my Boris Effects Silhouette plugin. Launch the Silhouette interface, and boom, there we are. In the other classes of this series, we always started out with some kind of preset that already gave us a starting point. Well, I don't see any 3D scene or Unproject Reproject preset here, so I'm going to select Comp. That way I've got a blank slate to start with, just my footage and my output node. Before we can start our Unproject Reproject workflow, we will, of course, need a match moved camera. Now, this camera could come from a number of places. We could import a FBX of the camera, so we could have tracked the shot either in Mocha Pro or in SynthEyes. We could even have used the Flame Slam tracker and pulled the FBX from there. All that is totally fair game. But if you want to have a no-fuss, easy-to-use camera tracker, we've got one right here in the 3D scene node, powered by SynthEyes technology, but really streamlined for quick and easy camera solving. Now looking at this shot, this is pretty undistorted. Well, there's some distortion in there. I could have picked up the lens distortion node inside of Flame to rectify that before I even entered the Silhouette plugin. That's the beauty of having something like Silhouette as a plugin. I don't have to worry about exporting or manually transferring lens distortion values. Instead, I can just put Silhouette exactly at that point in my batch flow graph where I need it and mix and match it with Flame's native tools. This looks like it should track pretty easily, save for that big car driving along the road. So, before we delve into the 3D scene node itself, let's just really quickly create an occlusion mat for that, so that Silhouette will not place any trackers on it. I'm going to pick up a mask ML node and just drag a box around the car. Now Silhouette will look for any object of interest inside that box area and create a mat for that. Lovely. Now this is just for a single frame, so let's pick up mat assist.ml to propagate this throughout the clip. As I didn't create the box on the very first frame, I will need to set my keyframing to keyframes data port. There we go. Let's use a mat repair node to grow our mat out a bit, and easy as that, we've got our holdout. Now let's focus on the centerpiece of this workflow, the 3DC node. The 3DC node has this little mat input on the side for our occlusion mat, so let's pipe it in there. Let me quickly rearrange my node tree. There, that's better. Okay, now for the match move. I want to have a lot of trackers in my image for alignment of our cards, so let's bump the minimum trackers per frame to 40. Also, this is quite a long shot, so I will aim for 1000 trackers in total across the entire range. And regarding the blip size, let's just leave that at the defaults. Before I solve, I need to tell Silhouette to actually look at the mat input for our little occlusion mat. But now, I can press that big solve button and let Silhouette do its thing. That actually looks like a pretty decent solve. For the first task of this shot, we'll work with patches. Once we get more into the nitty-gritty, we'll also add some painting into the mix. Normally, this is where the tedious part of this workflow begins. Aligning the scene and then the cards, and then finally, at some point, start unprojecting and eventually retouching. Luckily, Silhouette makes the whole affair pretty straightforward. I was quite generous with my trackers, so I've got a lot of points to work with. But what can we actually do with them? Let's go to our point cloud here and select points on a plane that we want to work with. I will start with a manhole here. See these lines here once I select a couple of points? They already give me a great indication where our cards would be aligned. And this updates live depending on the points I've got selected. Good, I'm happy with that. Let's select the card tool here and then just draw a card right along the points we selected. Let's see how well that stays in place. If I go up here to the viewer, I can select to not only stabilize to that card, but also unproject that card right here in the viewer. That looks pretty neat. So let's give this card a proper name. But while checking the quality of the stabilization in the viewer is great, having it in the viewer alone will not get us any closer to removing the manhole. So let's disable the viewer unproject and instead let's bring in the unproject node. I will hook it up to the original image here and, really important, connect the data port from my 3DC node to the Unproject node. In the properties, I have to, of course, select the card we just drew because, trust me, this will not be the only card for this shot. I will quickly roto the manhole and then use a transform node to patch up that hole. And I don't have to care about the perspective anymore, as we've got a truly orthogonal view of our street. But how do we get the perspective back in? Well, that's easy. Our Unproject node has got a body. Yes, you guessed that right. The Reproject node. We can bring that in and pipe our retouched, unprojected image in here and then once again use the data port. But this time, we'll not connect from the 3DC node, but rather just straight from the Unproject node. That way, Silhouette already knows which card to use to properly reproject that image. No setup in the properties necessary at all. All that's left for us to do is to comp the reprojected image back on top of our footage. And now it's basically rinse and repeat. Basically. There are a couple of gotchas and tricky situations you might encounter. So let's try to tackle the graffiti here. There are not really that many points here on the building. However, the building right next to us is virtually smothered in points. So how about this? We select a couple of points here, create a card there, and then just offset the entire card to the front building? Sounds good, but there's just one minor issue. If we try to select the points here, we can see the orientation is all over the place. I can already see that with the little indicator lines, but just to prove the point, yeah, that card is nowhere near where I want it. Why is that? The issue is that we are also catching a lot of trackers behind the building from a single view that is really hard to see. To make this easier, go up here and switch to the quad view. Down here, we can still see our view through the camera, but now it's much easier to identify the appropriate points in the other views as well. Let me pull in a new card. Almost there, we just need to adjust the rotation a bit more and now I can grab the translation tool and drag this to the front building. Now it's really rinse and repeat. Connect the Unproject node, do your offsetting, and then reproject. Now for another fixer-upper. Let's clean up the tire marks here in the snow. There's our card. Now this basically screams for painting. Let's bring in our paint node. But, like before, I want to paint on the stabilized, unprojected footage. Quick interlude here. At this point, we've got two options. We can paint on the unprojected image, but we can also directly hook the data port of the 3DC node into the paint node. We explored a similar technique with the Roto node instead of the 3DC node in the class about Fusion and the paint node, so I'll make sure to leave their class linked in the description. But still, if I want to start painting now, I can't do anything. It looks like the paint node is somehow locked. No worries, there's a really simple fix. Just save your Silhouette project. Everything we've done so far gets automatically saved within your host application file, so in our case in Flame's batch script. But the paint node can grow quite heavy, with virtually all the paint strokes in there live and editable. So to accommodate all this data, Silhouette requires its own save file to put all this data in. So, once I save that Silhouette file away, I can paint in the snow to my heart's content. As you can see, I used the same techniques to clean up some of the other areas as well. Just getting rid of all these tiny little distractions to give the scene a bit more of a stylized look. That is the beauty of having a good camera solve for your scene. You can apply it anywhere and solve a number of different problems with the same tool. I really like Silhouette's approach to the Unproject Reproject workflow, as it trims away a lot of the repetitive setup tasks, so I can get to the actual work much faster. And the built-in SynthEyes match moving can get you a good camera solve really quickly as well, while still leaving the door open to import your own camera track. So we already built quite a node tree in this class, but in the final class of this series, we'll really take it to the next level by bringing Silhouette's node-based approach right into After Effects, using it for everybody's favorite pastime, green screen keying. I'm Christoph Zapletal for Boris Effects, and I'll see you there.